When we look at a crime, we usually get laser focused on the who and the how. But what if we're missing the point? What about the why behind the story that gets told afterwards? Today, we're not trying to solve a case. We're going to do something different. We're going to deconstruct the incredible, complex architecture of a denial narrative. Let's take a look at the blueprint.
And this is the question that sits right at the heart of it all. What happens when the behaviors of a truly innocent person look exactly like the behaviors of a guilty one? Seriously, think about that for a second. The frantic, defensive, maybe even irrational reactions of someone who's been traumatized, could they be a mirror image of the calculated moves of someone hiding a terrible secret? And that's the paradox we're diving into today.
Look, this isn't just about one specific story. It's about how this kind of profound ambiguity can just swallow the truth whole. So our goal here is to break down the behavioral patterns that build this massive wall of confusion. We're going to try to understand why sometimes telling fact from fiction feels, well, just about impossible.
Okay, so the first and, you could argue, the most powerful defensive wall you can build is what I'm calling the fortress of faith. And this is a masterstroke, really, because what it does is it completely shifts the battlefield. You're no longer in a forensic investigation, which is all about evidence. Suddenly, you're in a moral drama, and that's all about belief. And this is where the wires get crossed. Logically speaking, you're dealing with two totally different kinds of truth. On the one hand, you've got factual truth. It needs evidence, stuff you can check, stuff you can verify. On the other hand, you've got moral truth. That's based on faith, on a deep, personal conviction. So when someone swears to God they're innocent, what are they actually doing? It's an unfalsifiable claim. It might prove that they truly believe they're innocent, but it says absolutely nothing about the facts. And when you mix those two up, well, you can stop a forensic investigation dead in its tracks.
This whole idea feeds right into a fascinating psychological concept, belief superiority. This is the absolute conviction that your internal certainty, what you feel in your soul to be true, is more real and more valid than any piece of external objective evidence. Now, what's so important to get here is that this doesn't have to be a conscious lie. It can be a genuine fusion, where a person's very identity becomes completely inseparable from their belief in their own innocence.
And boom, here is a perfect real-world example of this in action. This statement, it isn't just a denial. No way. It is a declaration. It's saying that an internal feeling, I didn't do it, overrules any external fact, no matter how scientific it is. That right there is belief superiority in its absolute purest form. So, okay, let's just think about the practical effect of this for a second. For an investigator, what does this do? Well, whether it's genuine faith or just a really clever strategy, the result is exactly the same. It's a dead end. Investigators need claims they can test, evidence they can prove or disprove. But how in the world do you cross-examine spiritual certainty? How do you challenge an oath made to God? The simple answer is, you can't. The entire investigative process just gets short-circuited. But here's the thing. Even the most solid-looking fortress can have cracks. And in this one, a pretty big inconsistency starts to show up when you ask one simple question. When and with whom was this deep faith actually being shared? I mean, just look at this. The contrast is night and day. With an investigator who was on their side, who believed their story, you see cooperation, fellowship, even praying together. But with investigators who were skeptical, you get hostility, obstruction, and accusations. This pattern, it forces you to ask a tough question. Was faith a core guiding principle, or was it a tool? It sure looks like religious fellowship was conditional. It was a reward for agreeing with them, not some constant, unshakable value. And this whole pattern points toward a philosophical idea known as instrumental religiosity. It's really just asking a simple question. Is faith being used as a genuine spiritual foundation, or is it being used as an instrument, a tool, to achieve some other goal? In this case, could that goal be sorting people into piles? Signaling who's an ally and who's an enemy? Building trust, but only with people who already accept your story. Psychologically, this is a textbook example of something called splitting. It's a defense mechanism our brains use to make a scary, complicated world feel simple. It just divides everyone into two camps, the all-good allies who are with us and the all-bad enemies who are against us. But, and here we are again, back at that central problem, splitting is what a terrified, innocent, traumatized person might do to cope, and it is also an incredibly effective strategy for a guilty person to isolate threats and rally support. The behavior, it's identical. And this very pattern of splitting people into good and bad leads us right down the path to the second major defensive wall, the creation of a phantom menace. This is the narrative that the police weren't just doing their jobs. No, they were hostile persecutors right from the very beginning. So the narrative they built was simple, but it was incredibly powerful. Law enforcement was biased against us. They were hostile from the moment they walked in the door. This wasn't just a minor complaint, It became a cornerstone of their entire public defense, framing every single interaction through this lens of persecution. But then you step back and you look at what the police were actually doing, and what you see is pretty much standard investigative procedure. Securing the crime scene, asking to interview the immediate family, considering that the family might be involved as one of many possibilities. These are the first things you do in any investigation like this. So the real question is, why was there such a massive gap between these neutral actions and the perception of them as hostile attacks? So why that gap? Well, one very human explanation is something called hostile attribution bias. When someone goes through an extreme trauma, their brain can go into hypervigilant mode. It starts interpreting completely neutral things, like a standard police question, as direct threats. So it's a genuine trauma-induced misperception. The feeling of being persecuted can be 100% real, even if the persecution itself isn't actually happening. But then, you have to look at it from the other side. From a purely strategic point of view, creating this narrative is brilliant. It's a preemptive strike. If you convince everyone that the investigators are biased from day one, then you've already discredited any damaging evidence they might find before they even find it. You're not just reacting to the story, you are controlling the entire narrative and basically poisoning the well for any information that doesn't fit your version of events.
Which brings us all the way back around to the central haunting question of this entire analysis. Was this elaborate, multi-layered defensive architecture a necessary shelter for innocent, traumatized people just trying to survive? Or was it a sophisticated, custom-built hiding place for the truth?
And this right here is the final, frustrating knot that's impossible to untie. Innocent trauma can absolutely lead someone to build a fortress of faith for comfort. A guilty person can build the exact same fortress for cover. Trauma can cause you to split the world in two out of pure fear. A guilty person can use that same tactic as a strategy. Trauma can create a genuine, deeply felt sense of persecution. A guilty person can construct that narrative to protect themselves. You have two polar opposite realities, producing identical, observable behaviors. So at the end of the day, what you're left with is this defensive fortress so perfectly put together that it becomes impenetrable. This combination of faith and splitting and a persecution narrative, it creates this unbreakable ambiguity. And maybe that's the frustrating genius of it. The structure protects its occupants so completely that we can never be entirely sure what or who they truly needed protection from in the first place. And that leaves us with one last haunting question to sit with. In the face of an unthinkable tragedy, is faith the ultimate truth, or can it become the ultimate hiding place?